Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Ong Chen Hui, and welcome to the panel discussion on leaders shaping the new world. So we have two leaders here. The first is the founder of IoT Tribe, Tanya Suarez, and we also have the founder and CEO of Perx Technologies, Anna Gong. So welcome, panelists. Do you want to give a short introduction to yourself?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you very much, Chen Hui. Hi, my name is Anna Gong. I'm the CEO and founder of Perx Technologies. We created a category called lifestyle marketing to serve the enterprise space as well as digital natives and transforming how we drive user behavior to contribute to corporations' top line and bottom line objectives. And so using gamification methods as well as advanced campaign automation and a lot of the data analytics and AI perspective into driving these top line revenue. So it's really in the, in our approach to looking at the digital natives differently and how experience and the whole experience and creation or creator economy, as most analysts call it, has changed the paradigm shift for a lot of organizations, whether you're traditional or new age or digital natives, to think about how we engage customers. And I'm originally from San Francisco. I've been in Asia for a decade, and this is my 5th startup rodeo show, first in Asia. So I've always been in tech, and I love it. I'll probably stay until I go. Tanya, next.
Thank you. Well, difficult to follow on from that, Anna. So thank you for setting the bar so high. Chen Hui, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'm Tanya Suarez. I am the CEO and co-founder of IoT Tribe. IoT Tribe is an equity-free accelerator. We are headquartered in the UK, and we also have operations in Singapore. We've got brilliant teams there, and we run accelerators also across Europe. Our UK-focused accelerators are around industrial tech and more recently connected places. And in Singapore, we are focused on deep technology, so super exciting. Our Madrid-based accelerator, which brings in founders from all over Europe, including the UK, is focused on space technologies, but not just things like pico satellites, so those are satellites the size of the Rubik's Cube, but also downstream space technologies. And across all our programs, we have some amazing women founders and leaders that are part of either only women teams or are co-founders in these high growth companies. Thank you.
Thank you to both. It's very illustrious careers that you guys have. Can I also understand a bit, right? Just now, Tanya, you mentioned about pico satellites. And I'm curious, are there really ladies and women founders in this particular area?
So it's really interesting. We've had, on our current space tech program, we have 3 companies that are led by women. So for example, the Techia is actually led by Candela Sancho, and that's a company that uses satellite imagery to analyze the water tables. So to really signal where there's a danger that water tables are falling to very low levels. And if they do, that can have an impact on infrastructure. You know, we've just heard, of course, the very sad news coming across from Florida. I think climate change is a huge game changer for a lot of satellite technologies, and we're going to be seeing very many more companies using these sources of data and high resolution imagery as one of the inputs, at least, into their companies and technological solutions. I think generally space technologies have been the domain and the purview of male founders. That's definitely changing. If you look at the European Space Agency, there was recently a call for new astronauts. They had 22,000 applications. I would love to have done that when I was younger, but actually almost a quarter of those are now from women. And that's a significant increase from previous periods in which they've launched these recruitment campaigns. It looks promising.
It's great to know that there are so many women founders nowadays. So Anna, I know that you actually do quite a bit of, you have a strong track record of mentoring startups and supporting founders. How did you come to be passionate about technology? And did you always think that you will be working in this industry?
The answer is no. Everything is very serendipitous and by happen chance. I think when you graduate with very little guidance, and I think this generation has been spoiled with choice and spoiled with mentorship and various programs. I wish when I was in my generation 20 years back, I had the luxury of going to all these different programs and getting mentored and whatnot. And there's so much focus around even female leadership and female founders today, more so than ever, which is fantastic to learn. But how I came about is literally by accident. You know, after you graduate from college, you get the tracks that really attract the you know, I would say the top tier schools are either investment banking or management consultant. So those two have been the driving force of selecting your career, right? And so being in California, I naturally chose management consulting. But instead of going to New York and doing all the big, I would say, strategic consulting, I got sent to San Francisco to do IT consulting during the ERP days, the dot-com boom days, where everything was so hot, and they put you on projects. And I was, you know, I was trained to code. I graduated with economics degree, and I went through a crash course of learning Java, COBOL, Power Builder, you name it, you know, SQL, everything. And so you pass through that, and then they put you on all these different projects, and you start to implement, and you find your expertise. And even with the expertise, you don't know. You're like, should I go into HR? Should I go into ERP? Should I go into, you know, all these different segments and industries? And so you just pick. So I tell you, back then, I say again, it's literally by chance that you stumble upon something that you really like or are passionate about. And because I actually went through a surge and the dot-com days, there's just so many options to explore. And during that time, I would say, you know, the being an alpha personality and extrovert, I did not enjoy programming 16 hours a day behind a screen. And I was more excited about being on the front line, working with customers, partners, building the business, go-to-market strategy. And so this is where, you know, I actually pivoted away from coding to working in the business development realm. And so from there on out, I started to work with startups. And the first startup that I worked with was, I was employee number 4 with 3 engineers in a warehouse in San Jose. While they're tinkering and programming and creating great stuff, I was working with on the sales, marketing, VC decks, all of the other things. And you fast track and you learn by mistakes and trials and tribulations, and then you get thrown into the deep end. And so 2 years into that, you know, that's when you started to get those very interesting muscles to strengthen. And so I learned by trial and error. And this 20 years later, you know, you're still in it.
Yeah, I think I have to echo your experience. When I graduated from my master's and was looking for a job, I mean, I kind of knew that with my engineering background, I wanted to be in tech, but really there wasn't that kind of exposure that is available today. And I really didn't know what in tech was actually available. Yeah, so totally resonates with your experience. Tanya, what about you? So how do you become passionate about technology? And do you always think that you wanted to work in it?
So my first job was actually with the Princess Trust, which is actually an organisation that is focused on disadvantaged young people. And I built out their European program, and it was an amazing job. It taught me so much about you know, the world. I was in contact with a whole range of people that there's no way I would have had the opportunity to meet and to work with if I hadn't been part of the Princess Trust. But the most important thing, I think, was that it really set me on the course for management and strategy. And then I moved into a career in management consultant. So Anna, I think we share that. And I specialized in innovation, which is a word I have to say I absolutely hate now. I always say to my teams, do not say innovation. You talk about technology, you talk about new markets, but do not use the I word, because it's been unfortunately used to, it's become devoid of meaning. It's been used very lightly to innovation wash, if I can say that, things that are anything but truly game changing. So after very many years of doing that, again, Anna, we share that, like 20 years of work in innovation and strategy, I decided to set up, first of all, Blue Specs, which is still a management consultancy company that I run and I head up, but also IoT Tribe, which is working on the coalface of that support for really brilliant technology-focused founders, and really helping them through all of our programs to really understand what that path to growth is. Because we're equity free, it's really about the founders. It's about supporting them and helping them find that interface with business, finding the value of what they're doing. So it's not purely about the technology, it's about finding the niche and that proof of value. Okay, where is your market? Is your market here, or is it really slightly to the left of here? And how long is it going to take us to reach there? And what are the different milestones that we should be looking out for to understand whether our market is growing exponentially, or actually there are some signals there that we need to maybe be doing other things. And I think that across the multiple areas in which I have the fortune to be involved in. So, for example, I'm also a board member for the Alliance of Internet of Things Innovation. I come across so many large companies, industrial companies, European, Asian, from American, from all over the world, and they have they're all looking for their next big thing. So they've got these huge technology teams that are working on the new solutions that are going to be addressing how the world is changing. Of course, we've been through a year of unprecedented digital acceleration. But even before then, I think the rate of technology acceleration is increasing. We've known this for a number of years. The past year has just made that all the more game changing for all of us. And I think for me, the really interesting thing is that I still retain some of that social conscience that I had when I was at the Prince's Trust all those many moons ago. And I still believe that technology has a role, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that people aren't left out of this progress. The people that can't afford broadband, that they can't afford their nice, Mac laptops and phones, that have to study and work in confined areas. All of these things, have to be part of what we are addressing as society. That should definitely be something that we're not kind of leaving out of the equation.
Yeah, so actually, you have also done a lot of work with founders of different businesses. And the past year has been a fairly turbulent one, and with many challenges that businesses have to face. So how have you kept up with the changes that are actually needed during such turbulent times?
Anna, maybe I can start with the answer to that question, because we actually launched our operations in Singapore. We had a really great event. We had over 200 people at the JTC there in Singapore. And this was, I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was the 17th of February, 2020. And guess what happened afterwards? So it was really quite interesting. We did have a team out there, but it was the beginnings of a team. So I had to spend a lot of time online, kind of bringing the new team up to scratch on who we were as a company, making sure that the values and the ethos of who we were communicated correctly, and they were then able to take that across into all our operations. And that's been extremely challenging. I have to say that Valerie Lim, who heads up our Singapore operations, absolute credit to her, because she understood from the start what we wanted to achieve. And it wasn't smooth running. It wasn't kind of like, off you go, Valerie, go ahead and implement. It was very much a question of making sure that those communications were regular, that we were able to have conversations about what was working, what wasn't working. But one of the first things that she had to do was pivot from an acceleration program that was 3 months in person, and then 3 months lighter support with European startups from the UK and the rest of Europe going over to Singapore, to something that was purely online. So that was extremely challenging. We had to make sure that our experts were also able to adapt their methodologies and their training to an online environment. Similarly with our mentors, normally mentors would have gone out for coffee with people. You develop relationships that are very much about connecting on that personal level. And I think, as all of us, we had to kind of find ways in which we were still enabling that to happen, but we had to change the mechanisms, and it was challenging. It was definitely anything from plain sailing. There was a lot of trial and error, I'd have to say, as well. Well, let's try and do something this way, and if we do it this way, are we increasing the value and avoiding things like Zoom fatigue, which something that I think we all recognize. What do we do to make sure that people are actually engaged in the sessions, that they're not kind of like silently doing their emails in the background? How are we creating that cohort mentality that means that the founders are able to really relate to everyone else on the cohort and learn from them, and they're able to support each other outside the formal, very structured activity? We did manage it. I have to say that I don't know, Chen Hui and Anna, if you agree, I very much prefer face-to-face activities. There's an efficiency that you can gain from online, but there's no substitute for seeing people and having that cup of coffee or that mineral water or your green juice or your beer, if that's what you like, which I definitely do, by the way. Yeah, so super challenging. I think it's changed all of us, and it's also made certain things more easy to participate in. So for people that may have been more constrained in terms of being able to travel, either because they have children, for example, or other, elder care obligations, that's possibly been also something to offset. But so the future, I think, is going to be kind of probably a hybrid version of both of these worlds.
Yeah, there's definitely been some pros and cons of the COVID pandemic. The challenges that we faced actually have been more or less the fatigue side of things, overworked. As the pandemic hit, it actually benefited the tech world, right? So especially if you're SaaS, anything that you don't have to install on-premise, and which most of the system integrators, the old traditional business of getting on site, and really installing everything on site has been, I would say, impacted severely. But for a lot of the cutting edge technologies and startups, this is a defining moment for companies who are looking to start their business or maybe scale. The ones in between are actually probably struggling a little bit more so, but it has been benefited most of the companies, the tech sector. And for us, the challenges is, how do you manage the overworked mentality? Even though we try to move people to a 4-day work week, which we had to regardless for cost cutting measures. But despite that, people still wanted to work 6 days. We give unlimited PTO and trying to get people to get off the screen and do some more downtime and do meditation and spiritual and whatever that makes them regenerate and re-energize. And that still also didn't help. And I think because we're all locked down, the second lockdown has imposed a lot more mental instability and a lot more stress amongst us. And I'm including myself as a founder. I've been quite, I would say, disturbed, depressed, and also just don't know what to do during this time except to overwork myself, and which is not healthy. And so I think mental health is one of the things that we need to manage better. Once this opens back up, maybe that's a phased approach of getting back into the normalcy stage. I'm actually heading back to the U.S. for a short term for a few months, and I'm actually from Florida, so I'm looking forward to that whole space exploration launch, what Branson's doing next week. But I think that, for us, the challenges are really about sustainability and sustainable growth. Because it's actually in our favor, how do we manage the team and have that work-life balance? And it's really difficult to measure that when people are constantly on the screen and you're really not having that touch point. So, the challenges faced is very much more or less, there's too much opportunity for us. And how do we actually manage from, hiring faster? How do we, if we cannot hire faster organically, how do we look at acquisitions or M&A activities? We're now expanding to North America. And so there's just too much opportunities in our neck of the woods that we are not able to manage. It's the opposite problem. Nonetheless, it's a problem to have that we're facing. So I think there is, the mental health state as well as growing sustainably with the right team in place. And that's one of the struggles or maybe challenges that we've been facing.
Yeah. I changed jobs during the pandemic, and I truly found it very difficult to, and it's just very different, right? Because a lot more conscious effort has to go into humanizing the interactions and forging all the bonds and relationships in order to lead the team. Mm-hmm. So, so I think that part on the humanizing of interactions is tough. But the other thing that Anna brought up, right, that accelerated digitalization and the kind of pace of change, I definitely observed that as well. So what has been essential in helping you keep pace with the constant change? Maybe we start with Anna this time.
Well, as a startup, we constantly innovate. Sorry, Tanya. We look at creating new business models, new revenue models, new go-to-market, as well as new technology solutions, and expanding that way. We have been exploring a number of different schemes, like how do we change our pricing model to fit the pandemic situation? Do we do annual contracts versus, quarterly or monthly? Do we bring down the price point for digital natives versus, the traditional enterprises? And so there's a lot of things that we were embarking on. And we realized that there's so much that we could do, and it's just about focus. And in Asia, it's a very different nature because there's just so much mobility, a mobile-first approach versus the US or the more mature markets. It's quite the opposite. Still you do a lot of things on screen. And so we were looking at how to embark on territories that are, leapfrogging to the cloud and mobile-first businesses versus trying to expand those businesses or building digital teams and trying to go mobile-first or transition to mobile-first. So our challenges have been very different, I would say, in terms of pivoting, changing. And every market that we want to enter now, we have to look at hiring a local team. But at the same time, we realize that we don't have to hire, certain servicing team or a customer success and support team. We can do that from remote. We try to actually think remote first as an organization before we were headquartered here. And with, MOM hiring challenges, we were unable to really level up our team effectively. So then we had to think about how to fast track hiring and do other M&A efforts externally outside of Singapore. So we're growing now outside of Singapore, and we're also embarking a lot of talent and hiring and acquiring talents overseas as well. So quite a few different, I would say, paths and also business plans that we're embarking on. Tanya?
Yeah, Tanya.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about, I mean, obviously, we work with, as I say, technology companies. So the innovation, we're kind of forced to innovate every time we run a cohort because the founders are different. The environment in which they're developing and growing their businesses is different. There's always something new to change and to improve. I think that I'd like to answer that question by maybe mentioning some of the companies that we've had coming through our program in Singapore. So Risico Tech, Elka Batila, that Risico Tech is focused on financial crime intelligence, and they've been growing exponentially. In fact, they've just won an industry award. Smart Beings, Kirti Tandel, their AI-powered assistant was actually focused on the hospitality industry. So she's just had a year of being able to prep her potential clients. And now as we're coming out of lockdown, those potential clients, those hotels and the large organizations, the hospitality industry, have a real understanding of how that device can help them reduce the friction between their guests and whatever the front desk is doing. So there's been a lot of work in the background, I think, to enable that future growth. Moa, Yunsil, Data Compliance, Noodle Factory, a bot company headed up by Yvonne So, QuantCube, Ghislaine, Financial Nowcasting, any number of women founders that we've had that have used this opportunity to really understand the market more, continue to develop the technology, and I suppose really develop that pipeline. So anything that has been constrained because it requires a physical device is ready to launch and to go. I think that, Anna, as you've just said, the ability to identify and onboard talent, absolutely a common theme across all of our companies, male, female, or mixed founding teams, wherever they are in the world. And it's something that I think that, again, we need to really pay attention to, making sure that people are being trained. And, and training can mean anything. You don't just need to provide people with skills. Maybe you need to make sure that some people are reskilled or upskilled. Mm-hmm. We're definitely going to be facing talent shortages. So I think that generally as a society or societies, we need to make sure that we're equipping people in the best way possible.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on what Anna mentioned just now about making the business sustainable, right? So are there any changes that you have made as a result of the pandemic? Perhaps changes that you would not have ordinarily made this early on?
Wow, the changes I made are so plentiful. I think my company turned upside down, and we were literally, because we're agile in nature anyways, and so we're able to pivot in any shape or form, not just business models, but just the way that we engage our employees, thinking about mental health, doing meditation sessions throughout the day. But not everyone participates because, doing fitness classes together. There's so many things that we normally would not do online together. Even I mentioned I rolled out the unlimited vacation days, PTO. That was part of the pandemic move, and still people don't take time off. So everyone's locked down, nowhere to go. So this whole point about having time off and going on staycation, they still get back onto their devices. So we made so many different changes in business model, employee engagement, benefits, everything you could think of to make it more flexible. We have a culture in our company that has, we instilled radical transparency. And so there's so much going on. And if we don't actually talk and over communicate with each other, things could kind of get, especially we're all working remotely, things could get very challenging and messy. And then there could be a lot of rumors, you can lose employees, and there could be a lot of noise in the field, because we just talked about how talent is so scarce now, and with a lot of people leaving corporate because the startup ecosystem is growing so rapidly, and people are thinking about how do you want to contribute and embark on their own careers and journey. They're actually leaving the corporate world and going into startups, or maybe even being part of the gig economy. So there's all these paradigm shifts, and how do we compete, for talent as a startup as well? And we have to figure out how to not just acquire talent through salary, which is not the way. And we looked at different ways to slice and dice the benefits. And so that's why the whole, share options and stock options, as well as all these different types of employee engagement and benefits and upskilling, constant learning. If they want to, apply for other roles within the company, they can. And so there's so many different things that we want to offer to make it so flexible for people to grow and learn. How about you, Tanya? Do you see all that trend happening?
Well, no, absolutely. And just to come back to, what you were saying, the sessions for us, the mental health of founders is something that absolutely needs to have a light shone upon it. So we did, every time we run an acceleration program over the pandemic, we've made sure that we had weekly or bi-weekly social sessions. So anything from quizzes through to, virtual coffee sessions. In Singapore, there was a period in which you could meet up, up to 8 people, I think it was. So the team in Singapore just had everyone, well, not everyone, those who were based in Singapore come over and just have that touch point. And just generally, whatever we've been able to do, we've actually tried to design new ways of making our founders part of a community. We ran a Connected Places accelerator, as I mentioned, with Barnsley. Barnsley is a town in in Yorkshire and West Yorkshire in the UK. Sorry, in South Yorkshire in the UK. And they did, so the founders that came onto that program, it was about sustainable technology. I'll go into that in just a second. They actually sent out a care package, and part of that care package was adopting a local pony. So all of our founders got a certificate that confirmed that they were now the proud fathers and mothers of a pony in Barnsley. They sent out things like, local produce to the founders on the team, the usual hoodies and sweatshirts that, some of the founders then gave to their children and took photographs and posted those on our Slack channel. So all of those things that are kind of, they might seem superficial, but as Anna says, I think they're really important. And it's not just about doing one thing, because one particular, so meditation might be right for a proportion of people within your company, within your team, but others might go, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to meditate. They might need something else. So having that basket of options in which you're involving different people and catering to different needs and tastes and cultures and personalities, that's really, really important. But I wanted to come back to the sustainability piece, because sustainability also means something which is related, again, to climate change. And one of the things that we're doing is setting up the Net Zero Tech Alliance. One of the most important things to come out of the Connected Places acceleration program was the sheer the different types of technologies that can be used by corporates, by local authorities in the smart city context to really improve that decarbonisation rate that is absolutely essential. So we're going to be setting up that alliance, and in fact, we've just had confirmation today that the Chief Technology Officer from the Ministry of Sustainability Environment of Singapore is going to be at our pre-launch event. So there's so much to do across multiple areas, from government, from research institutions, from corporates, and of course from the technology providers and the startups themselves. So really looking forward to seeing that develop over the next few months.
Yeah, so environmental sustainability, that seems like a big technology trend, right? So looking to the future, what are the main trends in the tech ecosystem, and what opportunities do you see ahead? Maybe we start with Tanya first.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely we're going to see a lot of technologies that are currently, or the data, right? A lot of technologies are using or are built on data analytics, whether it's AI or, and that data currently is being sent to the cloud where it's analyzed and then, sent back down in whatever form the technology requires. It's used to power AI solutions, machine learning, etc., etc. What we're seeing definitely in Europe is that the proportion of data that needs to go up to the cloud is going to be reduced. So there's going to be a lot more happening around the edge. So edge devices, actuation, all of those functions that are currently necessarily going up into the mothership are going to happen at that much more local level, which again has an impact on the environmental sustainability because data processing and transmission and analytics have there's a cost to that. If you look at all the figures relating to Bitcoin and the amount of energy that's required to process Bitcoins, it's actually the energy use is greater than that of smaller countries, perhaps, like Luxembourg, or even Greece, which isn't that small a country. So yeah, there's a lot to do there, and that's just one trend. But I'll let Anna talk. I think that she probably also has some views on that.
Yeah, there's a lot that we've been seeing as well, and there's no one way to predict a specific segment. But from our lens and what we see every day, looking at I would say the Asia landscape versus the West and the East versus the West, with all of this convergence and the traditional enterprises with the digital natives and getting married together, I think the competitive landscape between telcos, banking, fintech, e-commerce, retail, you name it, insurance, it's gotten so gray. And if this competitive landscape has gotten so gray and people are now becoming co-opetition partners or frenemies, there's going to be a lot of convergence happening. And that convergence could also look at in different lights where there is an identity crisis amongst many of these larger enterprises because they don't know where they want to be. Like Singtel, for one, is going into virtual banking with Grab as a marriage. And that's embarking on something that's non-core, and that's diversifying their investments. And then you see a lot of retail conglomerates that own multiple businesses getting into fintech and payments of sort. And you see traditional banks trying to get into ride-hailing businesses and different super app, mobility businesses. So we see a convergence and we see a lot of identity crisis within these segments. And we also see a lot of companies, whether you're a digital native or you're a traditional enterprise, they're innovating outside of core. And because being just one business is not enough. And this is why we created this whole lifestyle marketing platform, because everyone wants to become a lifestyle ecosystem. And they want to become their closed loop universal or closed loop centralized data aggregation platform. And my prediction has been for the last few years is that if you have enough critical mass, just like these super apps per se, and you get married and you literally are monetizing on the data, you will become Facebook, Google, Amazon's biggest competitor, because that's eventually where you're going to get into, is monetizing on that data and getting into the ad tech world and the commerce world. So, the telcos and the banks are already getting into marketplaces. How do they become a marketplace? Grab has become a marketplace. If you have enough consumption data that is diversified into a lifestyle ecosystem, then you can grow that whole entire, monetization value and that sustainable growth. So we see a lot of innovation, convergence, and M&A. And we see a lot of identity crisis during this period, but eventually there's going to be a lot of competition. And as those competition emerge, the other competitors coming in will say, we're going to do better. We're going to disrupt email. We're going to disrupt how data is consumed, or we're going to give the power to the users by subscribing. Your data will not be abused. So we're going to see evolutions of this data monetization already happening. So it's quite exciting.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that both of you touched on data, right? And Tanya's observation is that in Europe, there's a lot more data that's at the edge, and Anna is talking about platforms. So
There will be. There will be. Yeah, we're in a transition that the sheer volume, I think that the proportion of data that's going to be analysed at the end proportionately is going to be greater.
Yeah, I see. And is there a reason for that? Is it because of European
yes, there
regulations?
Is.
I see.
There's absolutely a reason for that. So there's a concern. I mean, GDPR is clearly something that's been very, very successful. I mean, of course, it's got its limitations, and I think that regulators generally have a hard time of it because they have to strike the balance between regulating and setting the rules of the game so that they favour competition. They need to protect consumers, and they need to be just they need to be ahead of the curve for some things in terms of that consumer protection, but they also need to make sure that they're not stifling markets before those markets are mature and their, I suppose, home markets have an opportunity to compete properly. I think what we've seen in Europe, there's a new regulation on AI, for example. So anyone using European data for AI has to adhere to some very strict rules. Whether those rules are the right ones, I think only time will tell. It's very, very difficult to understand the full implications of regulation until that regulation has had an effect. It's probably been challenged in the market, or sorry, in the courts or at least on a couple of occasions through high-profile cases. So all of that is still to come. But there's something that beyond the regulator's view and beyond that need to protect, your citizens, there's something that's absolutely at the core of this drive towards edge technologies. And that is a lot of, and Anna touched on this, so a lot of European companies are partnering with hyperscalers. So I'm not going to mention any of them, you know who the hyperscalers are. But similarly, they are concerned that that data is going and that competitive advantage that is awarded to them through that data is being eroded through these partnerships. So by processing and analyzing and doing the machine learning at the edge, they're going to retain what in Europe is called data sovereignty. Now, not completely, but there is some part of that data, therefore, that the hyperscalers will not have access to, which in turn will, throw into question whether they can indeed have that access to that all-seeing crystal ball platform into trends and habits and behaviors. So I think that's really interesting. There's something called the Gaia-X initiative that was launched by the German government originally with France. It's now Europe-wide. There are a lot of things that I think in terms of trends we need to keep our eyes on and see how they're going.
Yeah, and so what have you learned from the past year, given all the changes that has been happening, that you will now want to apply to future-proof your businesses?
Oh, I think for startups, I can vouch that it's, most of the founders that I'm working with as part of the Southeast Asia Founders Network, as well as the global SaaS community, it's definitely in our favor. It's really not about how to survive this, but how to grow sustainably and manage. Fundraising is at its all-time high, right? You can get money by, just smiling. That's how easy it is. That's why, last year when AWS interviewed me, I said, this is the best time in was it April or May 2020 to start a company. It is, right? People are getting a 15 to 30x the multiple with $5,000, $10,000 in revenue and with insane valuation, right? With no product market fit. So it's not a issue of fundraising. It's not an issue of being in the right time at the right place. it's really about how do you then grow sustainably. And once things go back to normalcy, most of these startups will probably die off. There will be a trend. There's going to be a lot of casualties in the fintech space as well. It's overly crowded. How many wallets can you use? It's like we have 5 credit cards for consumers now, right? Physical credit cards, and that's our physical wallet. But if you think about all these payment systems, we're inundated with, that's why in the consumer economy and the digital economy, consumers are so spoiled, and our lifestyles are being funded by these startups, just funding our lifestyles, capturing our wallet share, and through the acquisitions. But now they have to monetize. How do they, once they acquire you, there's going to be a bloodbath and a price war of trying to figure out. I mean, even in Singapore, there are 13 telcos. Did you know that? Did you know there are 13?
Oh, the virtual telcos as well, the MVNOs? Okay.
Singapore alone, right? And so this is an interesting, knowledge where how do you, capture the wallet share of 5 million customers when the addressable market is so small, but yet you have 13 telcos. So there is a lot of shift, and it's maintaining a really focused business model and figuring out how do you own that niche market first and then actually expand from there.
How about you, Tanya?
I was going to say I have to slightly disagree with Anna. I think that generally, I think it's great that you've been able to raise money so easily, and I do think that there is. I think that there's definitely an increase generally of the BC funds and angels. The activity has definitely increased over the past year. But if you look at, there's still one challenge, and that is the percentage of women or diverse teams actually accessing that funding is still very, very low. So if you look at Q1 2021, there are 11 billion US dollars, 823 deals that went to women-only teams. I think it was women. I can't remember whether it was women-only or teams that were co-funded by women. In Europe, the figure is 3.2 billion, so that's less than half, over 395 teams. But that's still up from 97 in Q1 of 2020. So the trend is right, but the percentage is really, really low. It's like 2% in Europe and I think 4% in the US. Mm-hmm. So I think that there are definitely things that we need to still address, and that diversity in the investment landscape and the fundraising landscape is definitely one that has to remain high on the agenda.
Yeah, I agree with you on that front, because I think during the pandemic, females have actually regressed in their careers, and they have to go back into home-based learning, dealing with family. If you have kids, how can they have it all? They can't have it all. So there's a fallback, or maybe a digression, a slowdown, I would say, of that acceleration. If COVID did not happen, I think that the numbers would look a lot healthier. But you're right, still funding for female-founded companies are very little. Yeah.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I thought for anyone looking for an opportunity to future-proof their business or to grow sustainably, what advice will you give them? Maybe we start with Anna.
To future-proof their business, I work with so many traditional enterprises, and I think they missed the boat. They've been so complacent, and COVID actually slapped them in the face and punched them in the gut so hard that those with the deep pockets, when you look at telcos and financial services, despite that they seem to have deep pockets, they've been returning the lowest shareholder value during the pandemic times, and every other sector have actually produced so much more value back to their shareholders. It's because of the legacy systems. And I think to future-proof is to figure out to restructure the board, to restructure leadership at its core. And cultural transformation is not so easy in these large organizations. And also the first-time founders need a lot more mentorship and coaching on how to, not look at FOMO and the imposter syndrome as a way to feel insecure. There's just so much money going on at the moment. It's okay to bootstrap. It's okay to actually survive this period and not raise funds if you don't need to, because there's just so much money thrown at the founders at the moment. And so there's just too much noise in the ecosystem, and there's a lot of M&A activity as well. The vultures are coming in, and so should you exit? That's another, looking from an entrepreneur and a founder's perspective, there's a lot of noise around the ecosystem where there's aggregators, right? There are PE firms that are coming down to the second and third tier, looking at consolidating these efforts and aggregating companies and flipping it just like property. So there's so many different trends happening. Future-proofing the business is sustainable leadership at the core. And what's the culture, underlying culture, to innovate and to digitalize and to give autonomy, empower your team to be creative.
What about you, Tanya? Do you have any advice that you give people?
I'm not sure you can future-proof a business, actually. I think there are so many factors that don't depend on what you do internally that it's extremely difficult. I think that, as Anna says, though, the culture and the attitude of the leaders in any business are absolutely paramount. And I think for too long, we've seen not invented here syndrome. I've got the best and the most talented people in the world, which clearly isn't the case. I'm sorry. Especially as we see, well, nobody's got all the talented people, right? It's and also talent comes in lots of different shapes, forms, sizes, ages. I think that it's not just about young people coming out of university or coming from a particular university or even a discipline. If we look at, for example, AI and how that needs to develop in the future, we need people who are well grounded in philosophy, for example. It might be that some religious studies are also, because of that philosophical ability to relate to how we as humans interact and behave, we should also maybe have that into the equation. So generally, if I had to say one thing, it is make sure that you're accessing talent and understand that talent may not always be within your organization at the moment, and you may not necessarily have to have it permanently with the organization. So collaboration, looking externally, having your ears and eyes open to what's happening around you, and understanding that it doesn't matter if somebody's this small and you're this big. The person that's this small may bring something absolutely essential to your future longevity.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya and Anna, for joining us in the panel discussion today. I've learned a lot from both of you about culture and leadership and having grit and persistence. Right, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience as well. Bye.
Very much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Wow. What a dynamic and fluid conversation about leaders shaping the new world. Thank you all for being so candid. And thank you everyone for joining today at AccelerateHer at Asia TechX Singapore. I hope that you leave today's sessions feeling inspired and supported. Please join us in September when AccelerateHer will join London Tech Week with a full day of impactful programming. Thanks again for tuning in, and please keep pushing forward.